and welcome back. This is the Endless Report, episode 5. We're happy to have you join us today. Hi, Brian. How's it going?
Hey, Anthony. How's school?
It's going all right. I'm here in Miami, Florida. You can tell it's a little different scenery today. A little more light here, a little sunny out, a little cloudy, but still pretty like 80 degrees out. So definitely different than central New Jersey, that's for sure.
I like how you've got the dorm room background set up there. Though we got the guitar up on top of the bookshelf. We got the Italian flag there. Is that a school themed pillow there?
Yeah,
on the bed
I got a little Go Canes, Miami Hurricanes.
Very nice.
There.
Very nice.
Got a whole little pod set up going on. It's basically my entire living space right behind me here. Everything cool. I can fit in this camera is kind of everything I'm living with here. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for taking the time out of your academic schedule to do a broadcast. We haven't done one of these in a while, so I'm glad we are, and it's fun and a lot to talk about this week.
Absolutely, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of game announcements, a lot of interesting stories to talk about. So I'm happy to jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. We're going to start off here and pull up this Epic versus Apple lawsuit that's been going on for some time now. We just reached a ruling this weekend. So as we see here, a comprehensive breakdown of the Epic versus Apple ruling. We're going to get into it a little bit. I know you knew a little bit more about the story than I do, so I have a few questions for you, actually. So we see here the California judge ruled on the Epic case. I know that Epic won one count, but Apple won a lot of other counts. So I'm curious to how that went down, what exactly Apple came away with, and what exactly Epic walked away with here, because I know it's a little confusing.
Yeah, I mean, the consensus seems to be that it's a mixed bag, and that's consistent with my opinion on it as well. It's mixed and it's a little confusing in certain ways, quite frankly. So, I mean, I think we got to go, if we sort of go in the Wayback Machine, and we'll go back to what, the original story here, what was. So, for folks who haven't been following this, and maybe I'll even go back a little farther than that, because I think for our audience and aspiring game makers, maybe some background on just how all this stuff works would be helpful. So, you've got Apple. Apple has the App Store. We can use the App Store to sell apps. You can use the App Store to give away free apps, but that have in-app purchases. And the way that Apple's relationship with app developers works is anybody can be a developer on the platform. They make their development tools available for free, and they make the ability to publish apps to the App Store available at very low cost to anyone who wants to register as a developer. That basically costs $99 a year. But there are rules. So when among the rules are, the only way you can charge for something is to go through Apple's payment ecosystem. And anything that goes through Apple's payment ecosystem, Apple takes a 30% cut of. That's a pretty industry standard number and was for a long time. The same thing is true as a developer if you publish on Steam or if you publish on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Store. Microsoft or Sony or Valve is taking their 30% cut. And basically that's the arrangement. The arrangement, and as in the judge's ruling in this lawsuit, it's compared a little bit to the fees that that a company might pay. If you go back to the days of brick and mortar stores, there's often a monetary structure going on there where someone is paying for physical shelf space to have their product on it. And it's the same concept here. In exchange for access to the ecosystem that Apple or Epic or Valve or whoever it is that has their store provides, the developer is paying them a fee to do that. And the way they've chosen to structure those fees is it's just a percentage of sales. So if you sell your app, as a one-time purchase for $5, then the app store provider keeps 30 cents on the dollar of that, and the developer or publisher gets 70 cents on the dollar. And that's just the way that's worked for a really long time. So Epic monetizes Fortnite, in a freemium model of their own. The game is free, and then you can pay for various things around the game, including V-Bucks. And that's what a lot of developers do. And people, there's no question that was an innovation in the games and app world when that first came around, and that freemium now is the dominant model for games, particularly on mobile devices. And so that's what Epic does. And you can buy, if you're playing Fortnite on your PC, you can buy V-Bucks directly, in the game from Epic. But because of Apple's policy, if you were buying V-Bucks in the App Store, you had to buy them through the App Store, which meant that Epic only got 70 cents on the dollar from whatever they offered, the V-Bucks app. And so this particular suit started when Epic decided to offer a mechanism that outside of the App Store, outside of the in-app purchase process, to buy V-Bucks on iOS devices. And, Apple slapped them down from that and said they couldn't do that. And, Epic violated, that. And it's unambiguous that it's a violation of the agreement, the developer agreement that Epic or anybody else, our company, Eline, I happen to be wearing our company shirt today. We sell games in the App Store. We sell games on Steam. It's a standard agreement. It doesn't matter if you're a small company like us or an individual developer or you're Epic. It's the same deal. And so, Apple delisted their app from the App Store and said, nope, sorry, you can't do that. And we're revoking your developer license, Epic Games, and now you can't publish games. And that's how we got here. So Epic sued Apple saying, no, that's anti-competitive, and they were alleging antitrust violations. So basically they were asserting that Apple had a monopoly, on something. And the subtlety of what that is comes into the ruling in the lawsuit. And we can talk about that. And that Apple should not be allowed to do what they did. So that's the background. I mean, I guess, Anthony, is that consistent with your understanding? Does that leave you with
absolutely.
Does that leave you with any questions about that, or how this stuff works, or why it works this way?
I guess it's interesting to see that before they even decided, maybe this isn't the right way this should work, they immediately went, let's figure out a loophole so that we can just off-site this payment process to avoid the 30%, Apple charge. So I thought that was interesting that was their first move, Epic, in terms of how they were going to go about this. So I was aware of that, and I saw that I'm not sure if you saw the trailer they put out when this lawsuit first started, and they put out almost like a Fortnite cinematic, making fun of Apple, let's take on Apple together, almost as a joke. But it got a lot of fan record, it got a lot of notoriety on the internet. It almost brought a lot of attention to the lawsuit, and kind of in Epic's favor of freeing up this, Apple had this monopolistic kind of viewpoint. Whereas, like you said, this is a standard agreement. It's not like Epic was being, bullied into this from some point or wasn't aware of this charge. So I guess as far as me being aware of the situation, I think that makes sense to me. I just think it's interesting how Epic kind of, decided to take control of the situation in that way.
Yeah, well, it's a PR strategy, right? I mean, I think that when you became aware of it, and again, we as a business person in a company that does stuff in this space, I've been tracking issues like this for a longer time. So I sort of saw it coming, a little bit. But I think a lot of people, a lot of gamers like yourself, your first exposure to it was after Epic clearly had decided we're going to make an issue of this, and we're going to have a concerted legal and PR strategy around it. And so you're right, they put out that trailer, which was mocking Apple's famous 1984 ad when they debuted the original, Mac, which has this theme of, the Mac was the solution to the Big Brother, world, corporate cookie cutter world of the IBM PC. And now we have the Mac, and it's you're fighting back against the man that is the IBM PC. And then Epic mocks that. So, oh no, you're fighting back against the man that is Apple.
That's the other giant company. It's a funny.
Right, these are all big companies, and it's a tricky thing, right? I mean, I what I would say is I don't think I'm saying anything that's terribly inside baseball here, but I think the predominant reaction of people in the industry, certainly I'll speak just personally, right, was this is you're saying Epic, you're saying you're not happy with the standard agreement that every developer has with Apple, but you and again, you can make an argument that's that Apple is asking too much, of developers relative to the value it provides. And you can think that's a bad agreement. But you can't, it's the standard agreement. There's nothing new that's come up here that suddenly got sprung on you. And it really, you're making a strategic choice, to do something about, make an issue of it now and go about it the way you're going about it. Again, what I would say is I find it, the angle, as you noted, that Epic took was, we're rebelling against the tyranny of Apple.
Yeah.
On behalf of the little guy. And I don't know. I mean, I'll ask you, Anthony, I mean, is your perception as a gamer that Apple is a tyrant for, requiring you, if you're going to buy something in a game, to use the App Store mechanism for that?
I think it's someone who, coming from perspective, I'm not a huge, mobile gamer. I'm not a huge, iOS gamer. And I have an Android, but I've had iOS in the past. I'm not against iOS in any way. I'm not an anti-Apple person. But
of course, Google does the same thing.
Oh, right? Yeah, Google is very much the same way with Google Play.
Yeah, so because I don't mean to single out Apple. I mean, do you regard Apple, Google, Steam, Valve and Steam as Microsoft for taking their 30%? Sony. I mean, what's your perception of that as a gamer? Are you like, this is it's freaking tyranny, man, that I gotta buy my game through Microsoft's marketplace on my Xbox, or I gotta buy, the bunny suit from Apple through in-app purchases or whatever.
I think, I guess, especially in the digital age, I always prefer options, right? I always like, if I could buy this game on disc for cheaper, or if I could buy it digital with different options, I always like options. And the more and more we get to microtransactions and digital transactions and in-app purchases, that's all. You lose a lot of options because it's all, up to the publisher, up to whoever's charging you, and then again, it's up to what they're being charged, what percentage that the store's taking on that purchase to make that price, that final price that you're paying as the consumer. So I think, I'm not the typical person who would pay $20 for a Fortnite skin. That maybe that makes me unique because a lot of people are, and Epic Games is certainly profiting a lot of money off of those kind of transactions. So I'm maybe not the best character for that, but I don't look at it as Apple's this big, tyrannical, evil entity. I understand that is one of their revenue streams. They do need to make some sort of revenue off of their, app store and gaming spheres. I get that, and I understand like their need to get into that market. But again, if it's just an arbitrary, if they start doing things like just charging arbitrary fees just cause, then it would be a problem. But if it's a policy they've had for years and years, it's a 30% across the board every app, I can't really blame them for sticking with their policy as much as I wouldn't agree with, all the way that's always the best case scenario for each application, depending on the monetization of it.
Yeah, for me, philosophically, it's a complex issue, right? But I do, and again, here's your perspective on this. I mean, I regard it. I don't know how much consumers care, I guess is my statement, right? Consumers are certainly price sensitive to varying degrees, right? So, if I walked into the supermarket tomorrow, right, and suddenly everything was 30% more expensive because, the supermarket chain was imposing effectively a supermarket tax, and that was getting passed along to consumers. That would be annoying, right? And I would definitely notice that, and I'd be unhappy. But that's not the case here, because the 30% has always been baked in.
Yeah.
And where there are instances of you can buy something outside of the App Store purchase process, and you can buy something inside of the App Store purchase process, there tends to be consumer price parity, and the cost of being in the App Store tends to get passed on to the developer, right? So when I sell, and this is a great example, right? Our Epic's own game store, has lower developer costs, particularly for small developers, than the App Store does. So it's either 15 or 20%. I forget which, right? So we, from a dollars and cents perspective, our company would prefer that you buy the same game for PC in the Epic Store relative to Steam, because we'll keep more of the money,
the profit.
But, but the reality is, it costs to the consumer. It costs the same, right? We don't mark it up further, on Steam so that we can preserve the same profit margin. We don't do that. And in fact, in a lot of cases, if not most cases, you are the agreements that the developer has with the store say you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
So you can't offer it at a consumer price that is different than the prevailing consumer price, is effectively what they say. So I honestly don't know how sensitive consumers are to it if they're paying the same thing.
Yeah.
And the mechanism by which you pay for it is convenient, or is the one you're accustomed to using on whatever platform it is, right? Now again, you might be sensitive to it if I was like, yeah, man, if the App Store fee was only 15% as opposed to 30%, I'm going to pass that savings on to you as a consumer, or at least part of it, maybe. But I don't think anybody's talking about doing
no one will be that transparent or even know about that, I think. But
now, if I remember correctly, in fairness, Epic did that a little bit, because I think in the incident that sparked them getting booted from the App Store, they were offering V-Bucks. They were offering
Epic Games Store. Right?
Yeah, in other words, you, the consumer, could get the same number of V-Bucks for less US dollars if you bought them in the Epic Store versus the App Store, because they did pass that on, that savings on. But and that is what sparked the
it had all that context. That I think what you said before, like, what's the reason? Like when you talk about the supermarket example, I mean, to use like some supermarkets, like if I'm going like in for $5 for a bag of bananas, right? And then the next day you tell me it's $10, and I'll say, why? Is it because of food shortages? Is it because you're just giving me a supermarket tax? I think when consumers will want to just be able to say, this price is good, great, it's convenient, I'm going to buy it. I don't want to think about it that much more. I think I hear it a lot about digital games too. People complain, like, why would you buy digital? You're sacrificing all your freedom of waiting for a price drop, waiting for a used game. And I agree. I like the idea of discs and physical media having that, physical, price stability versus a digital store, the publisher, whoever.
Do you buy physical games?
I do, but not as much anymore. I have a PlayStation 5. I have a extended hard drive, which I don't use for the SSD, the PS5 games, but it's just so convenient to just tap that button and download with faster internet now, especially with the internet speeds that are getting way better. And I could just download a game and have it ready to play in 2 minutes and not have to get up and switch a disc for like the 30 games I have loaded up at once, ready to go. So it is like, as I know, it sounds lazy saying I don't want to get up and switch a disc, but for a lot of people, that convenience of having everything digital and portable, you don't have to carry your collection around with you. It's just your console. Like, that digital does have its benefits, but I do agree there are a lot of concerns with it in the long run, because once you give up that freedom of physical media, you lose all control of the pricing, your ownership of the media. One day if those servers shut down, you don't own that game anymore, you don't own that movie anymore, or if your console stops working, like, there's limits to digital media that is kind of unfortunately scary, because it feels like we're losing ownership as consumers, and not just gaming, a lot of things. Like, I feel like we're losing the ownership model of when it comes to media and programs, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating topic in and of itself, because I do think there are lots of things that erode the traditional concept of ownership, right? And it's everything from this example of, well, it's you own it, right? But you don't have a physical copy of it anymore, or you own it, but you are dependent on the platform or the storefront to distribute it to you, right?
Yeah, it's like we saw. I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We saw, like, earlier this year, the PlayStation announced that they were going to shut down the PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, a few other platform stores, and essentially brick those consoles in a few years. So think about it. If you bought a PS5 now, this generation, Xbox Series X, like, a lot of people, or most gamers even, we have the Series S and we have the digital edition. We have consoles where people are exclusively buying digital. And now we're seeing with even our consoles in the past that they have a digital lifespan that is limited and are shutting down. So you're essentially saying that in the next few years, maybe 10 years, 20 years, however long it takes with this console, everything you bought could be hundreds of dollars worth of games, thousands of dollars worth of games over the next few years. That's all going to eventually be worthless unless unless you're dependent on our servers and we're updating the next generation of consoles. Like, you're dependent on the future of these companies continuing to push things out versus I can go in my closet, find a PlayStation 1, hopefully if it still works, and I can play all my old games and not have to worry about some server shutting down on an arbitrary date. In 2021, like it probably would.
I have an original NES down in my basement, so I'm right there. I mean, there's that sense in which it gets eroded, but there's also the sense of something like like Netflix, right? Or a streaming gaming service as opposed to something like Steam or the console stores, right? Where it's not you don't own anything, right? You have a subscription, content comes in and out, you can watch it, but it's sorry, that's not available. That title's not available anymore.
Yeah, and it becomes like an expensive hobby now. Like, owning Blu-rays isn't something everybody does. It's just something like if you really like film and you want to collect, like that's something you have to just invest money in, and it's not really like an option.
So I mean, I think one dimension of this suit is there is this 30% thing, right? But that's a thing between the developer and Apple. And you are seeing other stores, by the way, including Apple, because Apple lowered it for small developers. I think it's developers grossing under $1 million a year. They lowered their fee from 30 to 15% on an opt-in basis. And Google made, I believe, a similar move, if my memory serves. And other Epic Store, as I said, has a lower commission than Steam. Now, again, Steam gets away. Again, that's probably a strong word. I mean, Steam charges more, and they're probably, without regard to whether it should be twice as much, right? If it's 15 or 30% or whatever, there's certainly an argument that Steam does more for the developer to earn its 30% because they have a much bigger user base, right? I can tell you you're talking essentially an order of magnitude, greater volume of sales. Like when we look at our titles on Steam versus the Epic Store, let's say. So I don't know, right? I will tell you if I forget if Epic is 20 or 17 or 15%, but right, let's say it's 15. So it's Steam is charging twice the commission of the Epic Store. Right. We certainly move more than, that's not exactly the right comparison. We certainly move more than twice as many units on Steam, right? It certainly has more than twice the effect in terms of when you have Steam positive, user reviews and the overall reputation of the game and how that affects the entire market across devices. So it's tricky, right? So breaking down this ruling, right? Because that's where it gets interesting. So there were my understanding is often the case on these antitrust suits. There are different elements to it, and you have to break it down. And there are points and subpoints. So one point is, does Apple have a monopoly? And the ruling was no, right? And the judge was pretty clear in that. And and it seemed like the judge in the ruling found some of the claims weird, right? So Epic was basically saying, oh, Apple clearly has a monopoly. They have a monopoly over payment, over in-app purchases in the Apple ecosystem. Right. And, I find that, and the judge found that to be a bizarre claim, right? Because it's like, that's like saying, again, we'll go to the grocery store analogy. The person who runs the corner store has a monopoly over how you pay for things in the corner store. Right. And it's like, that's okay. That's not really a monopoly. That's just that's just a business doing that. And Apple happens to be very successful. But as the judge said in the ruling, there's no being successful is not inherently a monopoly or anti-competitive position. So there was that, and then Apple was asserting all of gaming was the space, that should be considered here, the competitive space that should be considered. And clearly Apple doesn't have monopoly over all of gaming. No. And the judge, I think, in scoping it, said pretty reasonably, it's mobile gaming. It's mobile gaming. And, by some measure, I think it was Apple has 55% of that. 55% of the revenues associated with mobile gaming, which the judge defined to include Apple, Android, and the Switch, which I thought was interesting. The app, iOS is like 55% of the revenue of that, and that's not inherently monopolistic. So Apple won on, basically you're not a monopoly.
Yeah.
What Epic got some satisfaction on was the judge saying, but Apple, you can't make it so that what you can't do, Apple, is prevent a developer from linking or directing users to other ways of paying for stuff if you want to and if you provide them, right? Because again, right now, what Apple says is you cannot let a user pay for something other than through our in-app purchase mechanism, our app store mechanisms, and you can't direct them to some other mechanism from your app on our platform either. And it was that second part that the judge said, no, that's anti-competitive, and developers should be allowed to do that if they want to. I think that is, I think that from my limited understanding, that is consistent with what the law in the state of California says. We can debate the merits of that law separately, but that's what it says. So basically what that's going to open up is someone like an Epic, or any developer could have a link that says, buy my thing over here if you want to, buy it through this other mechanism that's not the App Store, which again is something and that hasn't been done before. And often, developers and including some big companies have gone through ridiculous lengths to accommodate that requirement by Apple, right? A great example is almost any streaming service, right? With Netflix being the big example. Like if you like Netflix doesn't want to sell you a Netflix subscription through the App Store.
Apple. Yeah.
Right. So if you open up, if you download the Netflix app, right? And let's say, and this was an example. I was watching, I think it was an LTT video, and they used this example. It's a perfect example, so I'm going to steal it. If you're like, oh, I heard about this cool show on Netflix that I want to watch, and the primary device I consume media on is my iPhone or my iPad. So let me download the Netflix app, right? And you do that. And what you get when you launch the Netflix app is what, Anthony? Do you know?
That home sign-in screen. It's like
you get a sign-in screen, right?
Yeah.
You get a sign-in screen. It's got the typical username, password, forgot password stuff. It has no mechanism to suggest how you create an account or sign up for a plan. It doesn't let you do that, and it doesn't direct you to anything that might let you do that. And you have to figure it out, right? That, first I have to go on some other device like my my browser on my desktop, or you can do it through the browser on the mobile device, but you don't get directed there. And create my account, subscribe to a plan, pay for set up a payment method for that plan, and then I can come back to the app and log in and actually watch the Kevin Smith Masters of the Universe reboot series or whatever it is. And again, that's a horrible user experience, right? Yeah. If a designer handed me that user experience, was like, this is what I think we should do, I'd be like, you can't do that. That's awful. But that's them jumping through hoops to accommodate that. So I don't know. It's and the other thing about it is you don't. So yeah, Epic can be like, yeah, you can buy V-Bucks over here, but Epic is not happy, and as you noted, they're appealing it. And I think the reason they're appealing it is the Epic doesn't care about having a separate mechanism for users to buy V-Bucks. That's not what they're interested in, right? Because they would prefer users buy as many V-Bucks as possible, and they would prefer that they buy them, you know, in the way that's going to be the most frictionless for them to do that. What Epic cares about is having to give Apple 30%, right? And there's nothing in that ruling, as some commentators have noted, that prevents Apple from finding another way to monetize developers, you know, so that the developer gives Apple compensation for access to Apple's ecosystem. Because again, that's where the value is, right? The value is the convenient, the massive user base and convenience of using Apple's ecosystem. So I don't as a developer, right? And again, this is the part that I think folks miss, that things like Apple, you know, the App Store, Steam, Epic's store, right? That the console stores, that these ecosystems exist, right? For digital content distribution, monetization, discovery of your content by users, payment processing. That's a massive value to developers and small, you know, companies or startup companies. An indie commercial game studio like the part of Eline that does that would not exist if that model didn't exist, right? And your favorite indie games would not exist, you know, if that did, you know, of the last 10 years would not exist if that model and the equivalent of Steam didn't exist. You know, and again, we can debate whether that's worth 30 cents on the dollar, right? But it's a massive value. And really what this comes down to, as Epic was fairly transparent about, in fairness to them, is, yeah, we see value there. We don't think it's worth, we say it's not worth 30 cents on the dollar. And we would prefer to pay less for that. And we think Apple is being anti-competitive in saying that that's what you have to pay. And that's what I think it comes down to. So again, I think Epic is unhappy because it's like, sure, we can let you buy V-Bucks directly, but Apple's going to get its Apple tax some other way. Yeah. You know, and the ruling doesn't stop Apple from doing that. So Apple could be like, yeah, fine, that's fine. You know, I'm just making this up. I don't know that Apple plans to do this. So sure, you can charge for stuff outside the App Store, but if you don't exclusively use the App Store for processing payments, then the developer fee isn't $99 a year. It's 30% of your revenue, right? Or something like that, right? You know, and you have to report your revenue separately out of band to us, and we're still going to charge you for it, right? So I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also interesting to note that I saw this part of the article here that the judge found that Epic just failed to make the case that Apple was acting monopolistic, but that they actually thought the evidence does suggest, this is a quote here, the evidence does suggest that Apple is near the precipice of substantial market power or monopoly power, but the antitrust claims failed because Epic did not focus on this topic. So the judge kind of stated that if Epic would have really went after that aspect a little better, or maybe pursued that better in court, maybe they would have actually got in charge with some sort of monopolistic practices. But I'm not sure on that. I mean, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, but it does seem there from that quote that maybe Epic failed to prove that in a certain way, but it does seem the judge kind of wasn't happy with the way Apple's dealing with things.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, and it's relevant, and it was also in the ruling, is these antitrust laws, you know, and anti-competitive laws are not about protecting a particular competitor, right? They're about preserving a competitive market, and so they're concerned with things like, a company has a monopolistic position if they effectively prevent any other competitors from entering the market, right? And it's just hard to allege that in this case when you have Android, which entered the market. The consumer was in development, but as an operating system, but it entered the consumer market, and the Play Store entered the consumer market after Apple entered the mobile market.
Yeah.
You have something like the Switch, which came in even later.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to argue that you're preventing barriers from entering the market when others are entering the market. And again, and you have competition in other related markets over this issue, right? So Epic themselves, charges less than Steam for their developer fees. Folks are trying to differentiate on that. The App Store providers, the marketplace providers, are trying to differentiate. So it's just hard to credibly assert that. And just to show my own cards. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical personally of antitrust monopoly type legislation. I'm especially suspicious of it in high-tech industries, where there's always there's going to be another innovation.
Yeah.
And there just aren't the same barriers to entry. And again, I guess my closing comment on it is, I look at it, I described how I look at it as a industry guy, but the way I look at it from a consumer is I own an iPhone, right? I have owned Android devices. I have owned iPhones, right? I'll put it this way. I own an iPhone, which is a device you just go and buy. It's part of a vertically integrated ecosystem that is controlled by Apple. And of the choices available to me for my mobile phone, it's the one I prefer, right? Because, when I was buying Android devices and when I tried Android devices, I found that the fact that it wasn't a vertically integrated experience did impact quality. There were shoddy devices. It was basically a race to the bottom on how can we deliver, check the checkbox on delivering this feature with the crappiest hardware we can to maintain our profit margins. And it just sucked, right? It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but I didn't like it. And now I'm on the Apple ecosystem. And again, I'm a tech savvy guy, right? My gaming PC, on the other hand, I built, right? I built from components, and there, the nature of the ecosystem is totally different, right? Because the reality is, if you want a dependable, fully featured PC, shortages of various things aside right now, you are vastly better off buying quality components and building the thing yourself if you're even minimally tech savvy. You've never done it before, right? But you just kind of, a USB cable from a power cable. You're better off doing that because you will get better quality, more dependable results than buying a commodity PC, which is, again, lowest common denominator in kind of the same way Android devices are. And that's just the reality. And there's a value to that as a consumer. And, in places where there's an opportunity to compete, again, on PC, on how do we get our games digitally distributed on PC? It's the nature of the PC game market that it is supporting a wide range of hardware, that it is, relatively open. And so, the barrier to entry to create my own games store, like Epic did when they created theirs, to compete with Steam is comparatively lower. They can compete on having cheaper developer fees. They can compete on, we're a very active, fun ecosystem anchored by our massive title like Fortnite, right? And they got a shot, that's fine. I just don't know that consumers want to trade the value that the integrated ecosystem on Apple devices provides for legitimate openness or choice, especially if that choice comes with drawbacks. It's a freaking hassle
It is.
to enter credit card numbers
Yeah.
on a tiny screen with a touch keyboard. It sucks, right? And every time I have to do that, you know, when a site, or like, you know, like I go drive somewhere and, like, you know, like you park some, now you pay, instead of coin parking meters, you pay.
Yeah, and you got to type it on your phone now, right?
And you got to like the versions of those where you can pay for it with like Apple Pay or Google Pay, right? And it's that one click, Face ID, Touch ID workflow, versus I have to enter a credit card or log into a PayPal account, you know, while I'm standing next to a parking meter in 95-degree heat in the middle of, you know, the summer, in my case, with a complaining 6-year-old who just wants to get to the beach, right? It's not fun, right? It's not good. And so, you know, and honestly, you know, if it's like, well, it's 15% cheaper, right, for you to go through that hassle to pay for parking, you know, which kind of costs about the same as an in-app purchase, which is why I used it as an example. It's like, do you want to save 15% on parking but go through that hassle, or do you want to pay 15% more and have it be one click? The one click is worth the 15%. Absolutely worth the 15% for me.
I was just going to say that. I mean, it's all relative, but, like, you know, a lot of times, I mean, you know, we're human beings. Convenience is convenience. If I could just click one button on my phone and it works, I'd rather do that than go through that whole process, like 10 times out of 10. Unless you're, you know, if you're charging me $20 extra, then maybe not. But, like, relatively, if it's a small extra fee, usually people will choose convenience, like, most of the time. And I think that, you know, going back to where you're just talking about, you know, Apple versus Android and kind of and all these markets. Like, I have an Android phone right now. I had the same thought process. I'm like, I'm a techie person. I'm gonna switch from iPhone. I want to have all these options. I like jailbreaking. I want to have all these, you know. Now I have an Android, and I'm like, man, like, I wish some things would just work. I just want, like, I can download all these custom icons, make all these cool layouts, but I can't even make a call to my family without, like, my service doesn't work. Like there's always some new problem where I'm troubleshooting or Googling things, and you know, with Apple, like I said, Apple's not this big bad guy. Like, they have, you know, the Genius Bar and the Apple Store. You can walk in and say, look, I don't know how to work this. Fix my phone, please. And they'll get it going. Versus, you know, an Android, I'm searching on forums and I'm figuring out, you know, like, technical stuff, how to fix the phone myself, because that's really my only option, unless I give up and go to some sort of, you know, tech service that probably wouldn't be doing anything much different than I am. So it's kind of like Apple has that system in all their products, and in their laptops and in their digital marketplaces, in their phones, of course. They have that convenience factor. They have that ease of use. And they have that Apple, like, brand that's so synonymous with that ease of use that I think it's so easy to just value the convenience. And I think most consumers aren't going to really care about all these little details if it's still around the same price and it's easier.
I think there are different. I think there are spaces for both, you know, and other value. It all comes down to the value proposition and finding the audience for it, right? There's no question there is a value proposition that Apple is servicing. It's vertically integrated, you know, device and content ecosystem, where it's just made to work together. It's dependable. It's reliable. We control every aspect of that, including the support. And the business model is really about extracting the most value from consumers over a long period of time. You know, I tend to like that business model because, you know, and let's listen, I'm not some Apple fanboy, right? You know, I like things they do. I don't like things they do. I use some of their devices. I don't use some of their devices. But I mean, in general, you know, companies that care about having a long relationship with consumers and extracting value for it over time, that I tend to find that leads to the most consumer-friendly behavior. You know, that on balance is the best for the consumer, because, you know, again, I've walked into the Apple Store with an iPhone that was out of warranty and had a battery swelling on it, you know, where the case was breaking, and was well out of warranty. And the lady at the Apple Store was like, yeah, here's a new one, right?
There you go.
Here's your in the back. We have the same model of phone. It's not refurbished. It's a new one that we just of a phone that's like 3 or 4 years old that we just hold for cases like this. And here it is, free of charge, even though you're out of warranty. Can we set it up for you, right? And it's
I love that.
And it's just like, yeah, I get it because they know two things. One, it would be if there was a problem with the hardware and there are more of these and one is going to explode in some dude's pocket, that would be bad press for them, and they want to avoid that. So let's get that one out of circulation and give you a new one. And number two, they know that the next time I go to buy a phone, that's a factor because I
remember what they did last time.
I genuinely believe now that if Apple discovers a hardware flaw in their device years later, even if it's out of warranty, even and if discover may even be a strong word, if they suspect that, right? If there is some evidence that they're going to replace it for me, no questions asked, free of charge, right? So that is an ecosystem, right? At the same time, I want the cheapest device, possible. And that's what I'm concerned about. I treat it as somewhat disposable, and I replace it. And listen, there are a lot of manufacturers, we all get excited when it's like, oh, it's the latest iPhone or the latest flagship, Samsung, Fold device or whatever. Us geeks get excited. There are a lot of people selling mid-range Android phones. They look at the numbers. We sell a lot of those, as
and that is what Android is to a lot of people. I feel like when you talk about Android to people who are just exclusively iPhone users, when I bring up Android, I have a OnePlus, so I wouldn't say it's a top, but it's more of a flagship phone than others. Yeah, and if you bring up a phone like that, they would immediately think like a 2008 just like Verizon sponsored phone. Like no one can even picture a normal flagship Android phone. I feel like if you're like an iPhone only user, I feel like Apple has such an advantage of their like you said, like their cultural, just their ecosystem they build around that Apple culture. Even when things aren't consistent, they are just consistent with that Apple ecosystem and things work. Like what I mean by that is like the MacBook Pro. Like they've moved to an all USB-C device. Now you have to buy dongles to get any USB drive, any HDMI cord, anything basic into that computer. You need a dongle, and it's all USB-C. Meanwhile, the iPhone is still in the Lightning port for the last like 3-4 years since they've made that change. And as someone who has an Android and has USB-C and use it all the time, I'm like, why don't they make their products a little more lined up? But because they don't need to. I feel like I guess they're very smart in the things they take away and the things that they just like the headphone jack. That's like 4 or 5 years ago now. It seems like yesterday. I wasn't happy when that happened, but now AirPods are outselling like every other earbud and earphones on the market right now. AirPods are a huge industry in itself, just that wireless earbud market, and they kind of just dominate there. And it's just based on them just removing a feature from their cell phone because they know that would happen. Like, so it's interesting the way the options Apple has as it just kind of controls the markets. And I'm not saying it's monopolizing in any way, but I'm saying it does kind of control a lot of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's why I say I'm not. That's why I say I'm not a fanboy because that's when they. I'm like my observation is on those kind of decisions. They get about half of those right, and it really has to do with timing the innovation they want to drive and timing their vertical integration strategy. Relative to the developments in the market. So, we're taking away the headphone jack. I grumbled about that when they did it. But the reality was Bluetooth, and in particular, some of the innovations Apple did with Bluetooth, got a whole lot better around the time they did that. And it made it viable. Because like 7 or 8 years ago, Anthony, like Bluetooth headphones were a horrible experience.
They were so bad. I remember. They were terrible.
But now, pretty much any Bluetooth headphone you can buy, even inexpensive one, I'm not just talking AirPods, right, are great. They're fantastic, right? Because that technology really improved. Whereas the thing about the MacBooks only having USB-C ports, it's like, no, people still have too many legacy devices. Just put a Type A port on there for crying out loud. Like
it's not a lot of those ports are not going away anytime soon. I was like, what are you guys doing here?
No, and again, there are reasons to
for this construction of the laptop, just to minimize, the space. I get that idea, but
I sort of get it though. Though that's less of a concern because it's more about the thickness space, and it's not really that much thicker. And it's I get that stuff, but again, it's just like I had to replace a laptop, and I wanted a thin and light laptop. This was back in like 2017 or 2018, and it was in the era where the MacBooks had the not well regarded keyboards in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I got a Microsoft Surface laptop of that generation, and it has one USB Type A port on it.
Wow.
Right. And that is less inconvenient than having multiple USB Type C ports still in 2021. Right. So it's where, so anyway, I mean, that's the Apple Epic thing. As you led with, Epic is going to appeal that. So we'll see. And that's what I think it's all. I think for them, it's all about we want a court to come in and say Apple is charging too much for access to its ecosystem that we want access to, right? And they may get that from some court, but I think that's what it's all about. So the other big news of the week, we've only got a few minutes here. Was we had Sony's big event, right? So what did we hear out of that, Anthony?
So the first big announcement of this, I kind of freaked out. The first thing to show up on the entire broadcast was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. The remake is real. It's happening, and it's coming to PlayStation 5 console exclusively at the beginning, which is kind of a shock. Did not expect that whatsoever, but Asper Media, who's made a lot of the remake games for the old Lucasfilm games, is making this actually as well. So they've done a Jedi Knight, a few other Republic Commando, a few other older Star Wars games remakes that have gotten a lot of acclaim. But they're making a PS5 and PC exclusive remake of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which, like I think we said earlier, we both agree is probably one of the best games of all time. So
it's one of my favorite games of all time, and it's I think universally regarded as being on the short list of greatest game possible.
At least greatest RPGs for sure. I mean, it's always something that gets brought up in every conversation about that.
So you've again, I'm an old dude. You're a young guy. So you've played the original. When did you play the original?
It was a little out of my it was a little out of my time actually. I mean, it came out when I was quite young. I ended up discovering it when I was, I want to say 10, 12 years old. I mean, this game must have come out when I was 4 or 5 years old. So, I mean, I wasn't really on the radar with then, but again, I built a PC, I had a PC when I was younger. I started playing Steam games, and I discovered this game somehow. I'm not sure how. I realized I was looking through all the older Star Wars titles. I was playing, the old Battlefronts and stuff like that. And I remember just hearing how much, KOTOR, that's the game. So I downloaded it. It was, as a more, playing a lot more modern games, I didn't play a lot of turn-based combat, so it was definitely a difficulty for me starting off, especially with just the wonkiness of the compatibility of the older game with my newer, with my computer. But figuring out all those little things, it was worth it because I just enjoyed the combat, like the dialogue and just all the choices so much. And unfortunately, I never actually beat the game. So I know, I unfortunately know I got spoiled. The kind of there are some story points. I won't say anything, of course, because if you never played that game, oh my God, like some of the story points. But I never really completed it myself, and I've been trying to go back in the past few years, and I haven't really gotten around to it. But now I'm like, should I wait? I'm kind of in that limbo now of, oh man, maybe I should just wait for the next gen experience. I'm not sure.
You got to be. I mean, I would say you got to go back. I got to go back and beat it. And you got to play it at least twice because, like a lot of Star Wars games, it has you can play light side or dark side pathway mechanics. So you got to play it each way at least once. Yeah, I mean, this was the one I was super excited about too, because like I said, this is on my personal list of it may be my favorite game of all time. Which makes me both excited and nervous.
Right? That's how I feel.
And in particular, it makes me excited because it's a remake, and it is a very narrative rich game. So I'm excited to see it in a with updated visuals and things like that. It's makes me a little nervous because BioWare is not involved in the remake at all. And for those who haven't played the game, the original version has a very and it was somewhat innovative at the time, sort of like a hybrid turn-based real-time combat system. So it is in fact turn-based, but you can have the turn-based unfold in a way where it basically feels real time.
Yeah.
Or you can strategically slow time down to make choices about what your party members are doing. It was very interesting and novel mechanic at the time, and at least for me, I guess others might feel differently, but at least for me, it still holds up as a kind of experience. I'm certainly nervous about translating that and making it more real-time combat action intensive in ways that might or might not work. And again, I think if you look at the legacy of that game, because if I remember the timing of it correctly, you had Knights of the Old Republic, and that led to the Mass Effect games, which I think pull off their very story-driven, character-driven. They have this same sort of light side, dark side arc thing, but with increasing and differing over the series, real-time combat mechanics. Some of which I think were more successful, some of which were less successful.
For sure, and I think especially when they went into Mass Effect series, obviously a big shift for BioWare. So I'm not sure if BioWare were to be involved with this in modern day, how that would pan out. And, again, like they said before, I know they said some of the original team from Knights of the Republic was moving over to work on this project. I'm not sure if any of to what extent that's going on, but it's always something when that's happening, they love to say it on remakes. We have the old team coming back, but to what extent that's happening and what that means, I don't really know. I'm not behind the scenes there. But I also, one other thing that concerns me is I could be wrong on this, but I did read somewhere that they were considering changing, hiring new writing team and changing the story for modern audiences. And when I hear that, I get a little worried as well, because I go, wait, hold on. If I understand the game, being worried about the gameplay aspect, if you're going to change the story, I worry that you're going to end up making a different game than
they shouldn't do that.
And I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. I'm almost same voice acting, keep almost everything. I'm almost change as little as we can without ruining the integrity of that.
There's so many interesting facets like that, because again, it is arguably the best Star Wars story outside of the original trilogy, right? But possibly ever. You could make a case for ever. The voice acting on it is top notch. And again, most of the voice, if not all of the voiced cast, is still around and are very prolific. Voice actors in games. So presumably you could get a lot of them back if you wanted to re-record dialogue. But they shouldn't mess with that. The story is just so perfectly crafted. And again, it's a bit, I don't want to say gimmicky, but it hinges on a twist that now I won't spoil, but if it's been
I know
20
that
years.
So and I know that twist. So I'll leave it alone, but
it's been spoiled, but I don't know. We'll see. So that was
who don't know that, definitely just go in blind, because it's
do not, if you're gonna play it either now or in the remake, don't let anybody spoil it for you, because it was a jaw-dropping. It was literally one of those spoilers for me when I did my first playthrough.
My goodness!
It was great, because it was the perfect kind of reveal, because for me it was totally unexpected, and then when you reflect back on it, you go, oh, it was also perfectly set up, and justified and earned. But and that's just so hard. That's so hard
to do without catching on to beforehand, especially that far into the story. I just think it's impressive when any story can pull something like that off.
So there were several big announcements there. Do you want to run down the list?
I want to do this a little quick, just to jump on to Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine real quick. This was really exciting for me, because I'm a huge fan of Insomniac games and their first Spider-Man game and Spider-Man Miles Morales. So later in the conference, they announced Marvel's Wolverine, which was a shock to everybody because no one expected this game. So it was a brief teaser trailer. I'm not sure if they have any trailers here in the article, but some screenshots of Spider-Man here. Some in-action shots of Wolverine to tease that. So everybody was like, oh my goodness, a Wolverine game from Insomniac. Where's Spider-Man 2? What's going on? About, half hour to 20 minutes later in the conference, boom, they're also doing Spider-Man 2 coming 2023.
That's also how, just like Knights of the Old Republic, that's also how you do a reveal.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. And I was thinking, because at first we're like, oh my God, where's Spider-Man? Meanwhile, I was thinking, if you could please just get a cinematic trailer or some sort of logo, I would lose my mind. I'd be so ecstatic. Meanwhile, we got a full in-engine trailer. The PS5, obviously it's in-engine, not maybe pure gameplay, but still in-engine, no cinematics, and the PS5 looks incredible. looking at the screenshot here, pulling up for the viewers, but the trailer looks incredible. We heard, I believe, Kraven the Hunter, a big Spider-Man villain, as well as we saw Venom at the end, which everybody knows Venom. Pretty great timing for this, right? The new Venom movie's coming out this fall.
Yeah,
Spider-Man movie this fall. Spider-Verse, another movie next year, and then this game's going to come out after. So a lot going on for Spider-Man right now, for sure. If you're a Spider-Man,
it's like the year. I feel like it's like the year of Spider-Man.
It really is. Just like back to back, everything's going on with Spider-Man right now. So if you're a Spider-Man fan, really awesome stuff.
It's a good time.
Yeah. On top of that, the Miles Morales team is also working on Wolverine. So they have 2 teams in Insomniac. Oh, I'll lose my headphones here. 2 teams in Insomniac working on 2 Marvel games at once, which is pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome,
especially from this team, because I mean, their games in the past have been phenomenal. So I definitely believe this Wolverine game is going to be great. And I'm hoping, I mean, they've been a little, not, I wouldn't say, PG in the past, but I'm hoping that this Wolverine game can be a little more mature, a little grittier, because I feel like Wolverine could deserve a little more, goriness and kind of a violent gameplay versus Spider-Man.
I think that's what that character has become.
Yeah,
right?
and I feel like with Logan and all of that.
I feel like Logan was such a good and kind of landmark, film there. I think that kind of set the tone.
And this game's trailer, if you haven't seen the trailer, it's he's sitting in a bar. It's very red. There's a bunch of people beat up, bloody all over the floor. Somebody trying to hit a bottle over his head, and then you see him take his Wolverine claws out. So it seems like a very gritty, tone. And I believe they said it's going to focus on a very serious, mature storyline rather than maybe a full open world game like Spider-Man is. So I think it has a lot of potential. It sounds like a really great idea.
It's interesting how these superhero franchises have sort of become, across media, have become a thing. Like Spider-Man is like the mind-bending multiverse played for comedy a little bit, kind of thing. Wolverine with Logan became like very, very gritty. It's kind of an interesting development.
Yeah, and they're all like kind of finding their own like niche. Like I mean, Wolverine kind of has this, almost has like this Western vibe for this whole trailer.
Yeah.
Versus this Spider-Man's kind of got a new like sinister, with that the trailer, and then Venom coming out of the shadows as this kind of like mysterious new look, and they have the black Spider-Man logo indicating all that, the Venom symbiote suit, all that stuff. So that I love all that stuff. I mean, I grew up with those like Tobey Maguire movies when when he gets the black suit and the third one. So like the goofy movies looking back, but that was like a big part of my childhood. So I get really excited about Venom and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not a huge Marvel person, but Spider-Man I always go crazy for, just because I used to love those movies, and he's one of my favorite characters. But in comparison to the Wolverine game, I'm just really impressed with what that studio has been able to do. I mean, they came out of this generation with Spider-Man Miles Morales, right at, plus the remaster of the original game right at the launch of PS5. Then they came out with Ratchet and Clank, which was one of my favorite games of the year. Awesome game. And now they're announcing 2 more games for probably the next 2-3 years, like right afterwards, which is just like really impressive for a one developer to just come out of the game with like 4 titles like announced in the first like year and a half.
And then, because we're already over, but maybe in the last minute or two, we would be remiss if we did not talk about maybe the most controversial element of that announcement, which was God of War Ragnarok.
God of War Ragnarok, yeah.
And Fat Thor.
Absolutely. So this was something I was also really excited for. Everybody was expecting. We got that Ragnarok teaser at the PlayStation conference basically a full year ago at this point. So it's kind of been, a long time coming for this conference. Everybody's been really excited about it. Obviously PlayStation skipped out a bit on E3 this year, so we got some bits and pieces here. We saw some Horizon this summer, a little bits and pieces of some indie games. But getting back to God of War, we finally got to see God of War Ragnarok the other day. Really awesome stuff. And like you said, there was some controversy. I saw a little controversy over the way the game was looking and the gameplay and kind of some mechanics of people were a little upset that it looked very similar, but again, I'm not sure what your take on this. I mean, it's a direct sequel to a 2018, PS4 exclusive game. It's also being developed, mainly for the PS4 and PS5 as well, but it's a cross-generation game. I think it looks very improved. I think it looks phenomenal. A lot of people weren't happy with certain aspects, certain gameplay elements as well. I'm not sure of your thoughts on that, but also we brought up Thor, and I'm seeing if I can find a picture of him.
You may have to Google for.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get a Thor here just to pull him up.
I mean, we should maybe the next one of these we do, Anthony. We should talk a little bit about that topic in particular, and tie it into some other, because I mean, it comes back to this issue we've talked about in the past of franchise game making and what that means, and there's very briefly, when you're making a game, you're going to bring a new game to market, right? There's creative risk of which IP risk, is a category, right? And so that's why games in part is a sequel driven business, because it worked before you do the sequel. The IP is not risky, and you have that going on. But then the second kind of risk is production risk. And that's why game studios use the same engine, and they start with what they did last time, and they add a few new mechanics, rather than rebuild something whole cloth. And if you push the envelope far enough, people tend to like it. And if you don't, people tend to think it's a retread. And that's what folks are wrestling with here.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, especially, again, like you said, like staying in that new engine, like that's time, money, resources spent on creating new assets and new mechanics, new animations, all that. It's all development time. And I feel like when your goal is to create a great sequel and to build on an original, you want to focus on, building and not maybe rebuilding the wheel on every standard that you set in the first development cycle. I mean, when you had to build a game from scratch and redesign an entire new game, in engine, and then to make it sequel, you're not going to want to, redesign the entire bicycle. You want to, maybe add some handlebars, add new wheels. You don't want to have to start from scratch and start, blacksmithing and building the frame again. You want to have that frame and then expand. And I understand when people get frustrated when they see things similar, but I mean, if you want more God of War, that looks like a continuation of that story. It looks like a grander scale of that story. It looks like everything I'd want from that. So, again, like you said, it's obviously people have different standards. People have different expectations when it comes to how much, is the bar going to be pushed every title. But I'm excited for that game. I think it looks phenomenal. And I think, again, it's also a cross-generation game. I think people are forgetting that, as time goes on in this generation and we get into the, 2023, 2024 and beyond, and we see all these exclusive games for, the newer PCs, newer consoles, I think we'll start to see a lot of bigger leaps that maybe people are expecting from a generational shift that maybe we haven't seen just yet. I mean, that's to do with COVID and everything else that we haven't seen so many games this generation yet. But again, it's still early, even in a normal generation. It's still very early on. And
it is it is. I'm looking back. So God of War, the original God of War was a 2005 PS2 title. I'm just looking how old that franchise is. 2005 PS2 title. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I'm also
I have never played a God of War game.
Interesting. I never played the original trilogy until I played this recent God of War, not Ragnarok, obviously, the God of War 4, I guess we'll call it, the single title God of War. I loved it. Again, I think it's a lot of praise for being like the best. I wouldn't say it's my favorite narrative, like PlayStation game. There are a lot of narrative games like that, but it is a complete transformation of that series. Yeah. And I went back and I played God of War 3 just because it came out free, I think 1 month. That's like a PS Plus game. And I went back and I played a bit of it. And it really is. I mean, not to, I didn't beat that whole game or anything. So not to call it shallow or anything like that, but it is more of like a hack and slash, big boss battle. There isn't a lot of, it's a big Greek epic, animations, crazy mystical fantasy going on. This game is let's take Norse mythology and make it way more grounded and take it out of that whole Greek giant Zeus tall as a tower type gameplay and just make it more of a grounded, visceral Viking experience. And it's really the whole center of the game is based on the relationship between father and son, and it's a very narrative experience. So it's a very I love the game. Going back to that Thor conversation here, there's a lot of people have problems at the end of that game. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it was in the main trailer for Ragnarok. So at the end of that game, if you beat the game and you go back to the main shed area where the game begins, you get a secret ending where Thor surprisingly shows up and challenges you to a battle, and there's lightning striking. You see Thor's hammer. And it's this crazy reveal here, and I have a screenshot up here for the viewers. And Thor looks pretty epic. He's got a hood on. He's got his big Mjolnir hammer on his side. He looks great. So now Ragnarok's coming around, and the studio decided they wanted to redesign Thor a little bit. I didn't realize how much this redesign changed, but if we look up God of War Ragnarok Thor, as you can see here, he looks a little bit different. So people have been comparing him to... Yeah,
he's a thick boy now.
Yeah. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the fat Thor from the Avengers, comparing it to joking about that a bit. But I think it's a pretty funny design. I like the design a lot. I think he looks pretty cool.
I think it's a great design. I think it's historically justified.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you not historically, but mythologically.
Yeah, mythologically, that's again, he's how Thor's described.
Listen, we're all conditioned, by chiseled,
Chris Hemsworth,
and of course when you had fat Thor in the
MCU,
it was played for comedy. Because Chris Hemsworth is a great comic actor. I will also
say. I agree. Yeah,
fantastic comedic actor. But mythologically, Thor's like a he's like a ruffian party dude. I drink all the meat. I'm carousing. It's like, so I think it's totally justified. And here's what I'll tell you: if you contrast the two pictures you showed, I mean, I'm not saying I'd want to meet either of them in a dark alley, but I would be much more terrified meeting the second one.
Yeah, agreed. He looks like he can pack more of a punch. I agree.
He looks like he packs quite a punch. He's
agreed.
Yeah.
Well, so this was the ending of the last game. Yeah, we're running out of time here.
We're running out of time, so let's call it here. But I do think next time we come back and do one of these, maybe next week, we should go into this, franchise stuff a little bit too, and tie it into the news, because I do think the controversy